Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. I hope you're doing well. Today, I'm with Sunga. Sunga is an amazing Score Fellow, Class 34, and she'll be recording a super interesting webinar about serving your community as a leader. Sunga, you can jump into it.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Sunga. As Onsa's already said, I am serving at Philanthropy University. So, a little bit about my host organization. They are an online university that provides courses to community leaders. So, the courses range from global social entrepreneurship to girl centered design. The focus is on capacity building and resource mobilization. A little bit about myself is I am a project management and communications professional with experience in building local nonprofits, campaigns, and projects. So that's why my webinar is on serving your community, building a project that serves your community with a focus on marginalized communities. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can be together. And all right. So I named my webinar Serving Your Community and How to Be a Useful Resource to Your Community. So as I say, the focus is on marginalized community, but what is a marginalized community? So according to Young African Leaders Initiative, they ask the question and say, who lives in the peripheral of your community and why? So marginalized community exists nearly everywhere. There are people who, for whatever reasons, are denied involvement in the mainstream, economic, political, cultural, and social activities. According to IG Global, it says there are groups that are excluded for different reasons, such as age, physical or mental disabilities, economic status, access to education, or live in isolated places or depressed areas. So a lot of times as community leaders that are focusing on social issues, we're working with marginalized communities. So these would be the girls we're building programs for. There would be like whatever is our social issues and the people that we are building the program for. So having worked in a lot of marginalized communities, I think there are some of the things that we should consider, but also the mistakes that we make as leaders. So, what are the things that we should consider when we go in a community? If we want to build a project or a campaign, be it a one-time thing or if it's a long-term project, what are some of the things that we should consider when we are building a project in a marginalized community? So, a few things to consider when creating a program. First of all, is research. So, you have to do research. You research the problem, the community, and yourself. And another thing, and we'll go in details of all this. Another thing to consider is how is the community I'm serving involved in this. There's a saying that people that are going through things are the ones that know how to solve that problem. Like I cannot solve problems of someone who is homeless. Only the homeless know how to solve their own problems. So how would the community be involved in what you're doing? But also you're striking a balance between your passion, which is like your social issue, and the community need. And you look at sustainability and empowerment plan. So those are some of the things that we'll be looking at today. So the first thing was research and a lot of research. So first of all, you research the problem. So if you go in a community and you have discovered that a lot of girls are not going to school, the first thing you do is, okay, I am what is the problem? Is this really the problem? If I see these girls and they're not going to school, is this the problem? Is this really the problem? Or maybe something else is the problem. And then you research what has been done before. And if that is the problem, if girls missing school is the problem, what has been done before? What have been the steps that have been taken for to make sure that girls are going to school. If it's girls dropping out, what has been done to address that particular problem? But also you look at available resources. So this can be different things. So resources are the people in the community. Is there a school? If girls are not going to school, is there a school? Is a school far? What are the available resources that are already there? So that if you're creating a solution, you're not creating a solution with outside resources, but you're maximizing the resources that are already there. So those are the things that you have to consider when you're researching the problem. Another thing that you have to research is the community. So how does this community see this problem? So again, I will continue using this example of girls going to school. So how does this community see this problem? Does this community not see, so if it's girls going not going to school or girls dropping out of school, is it a problem that the community sees it as a problem, or the community sees it as girls being lazy and not necessarily girls not having access to education? So you need to ask from everyone in the community, like your demographics has to be different. Use these chiefs, use like whoever is a member of that community, you ask their perspective on that problem. But another thing on the community that you have to ask is, how does this community think this can be solved? So okay, if they agree and say yes, this is a problem, this is what is going on, and we believe this is a problem, we agree with you, girls are dropping out. So you ask them, how do you think this can be solved? Is it, you hear the ideas of how they think that problem can be solved, and you shouldn't forget to research what does this community need, because that's most important. They can have ideas how this problem can be solved, but what is their need? So do they need you to bring the school? Do they need or this problem is coming from something that is greater than that? So what does this community need? You research that for a community, you understand better your community. So you have, after you've agreed with your community that, hey, yes, this is the problem, or maybe they're looking at the problem differently, you still go ahead and ask them what they need. Another thing that you the in the research part, the most important thing that you shouldn't neglect is yourself. So this is very important because you are the push for this project, for this campaign, for an outreach, whatever it is that you're doing in your community, you are the push. So they are the first question that you have to ask yourself is, what is the question that you want an answer for? So when we're studying anything, there's a question in our head that we are asking. So what is the question you want an answer for? So if you're fixing if you're creating a one-time awareness campaign, what is that question that this campaign is going to answer? What do you really want out of that? So are you looking for the impact this one-time thing is going to do, or are you looking for the influence that you are going to do? So this is like something that you have to sit yourself down and be honest to avoid causing harm to the community. You have to make sure that you are asking yourself these questions, you are researching yourself. And again, another thing that is very important is, what is the balance between your passion and your community needs? So you have a social issue that you're passionate about. So, for example, if I'm very passionate about, I am not. If I am, I'm very passionate about human rights in general, like all human rights. So, but this community is maybe it doesn't see that as their problem. Their problem right now is food. They are very hungry and they want to have food. So, what is a balance? How do I make sure that whatever my social issue is and their needs are intertwined, that we both get what we want? That is something that you have to look for. Like, make sure you strike a balance between what you want and what the community needs. So those are some of the things that you have to consider when you're researching yourself when you're researching the community before you get to a place where you consider how the community is going to be involved at a very stage. Like, you have to look at those things to make sure you don't cause more harm, to make sure you don't have the complex of like imposing something on them when they don't need it. Let's move on to our next one, which is, how do you think your community is going to be involved? So you have to identify the key stakeholders. So if you go back to the question of researching the community, you talked to everyone. You talked to the whole community. You talked to the chiefs. You talked to the men, to the women. But now this is the point where you say, okay, who are my stakeholders? Who are the people that are mostly affected by this? So that's another thing that you have to consider. That's another thing that, when it comes to your stakeholders, you're like, okay, who are my stakeholders? How can I involve them in this thing that I'm doing? So make sure that you sit down with them. You sit down with your stakeholders when it comes to fixing the problem, and let them tell you how they see it, because the community can see the problem. So because communities always have a fresh perspective and can often see the problem in new ways. So the stakeholders within the community will also, so if you're doing a project with girls and the girls are saying, oh, we are not lazy, but the community thinks the girls are lazy, you have to sit down with the girls and decide, okay, how do you see this problem? You ask their perspective on the problem and their input in the solution, because the project is going to affect them. So community involvement, especially your key stakeholders, help to develop programs which are more accurate target to the local needs. So sit down with them, ask for their perspective, ask for their input in the solution. And another amazing thing that you can do is ask them to develop a vision and an action plan with them. So let them sit down and say, okay, so we have discovered that a lot of girls are dropping out of school. How do we create, like, how do you envision this? How do you think this is going to work if you were to go back to school? What do you need? And an action plan as well with them. Ask their input in what structures need to be put in place. So the reason why you have to ask for the structures to be put in place is communities are different in wherever they are. And especially, so for example, I'll give an example of like a lot of communities I've worked in, which is like African communities, there's a power hierarchy. So you need to know, when you ask for the structures, you're also asking, what do they envision leadership being? So if you're trying to raise a sexual abuse awareness campaign, so that's what you're doing in a local community amongst girls, and you want to send a man, some communities are not receptive of that. So you ask of the structures, like, how do they view leadership, so that when you're bringing in your people to do work in this community, you're bringing in people um, that will be able to be received, that the community would be receptive of. So you involve your community by identifying the key stakeholders within the community. You ask for their perspective and the input in the solution, but you also ask them to develop a vision and action plan with them. So you take that with you, but also don't forget to ask for structures to be put in place and what they think about that. So moving on to now your social issue versus the community. This is another thing that is very important. So your social issue versus your community. Here are a few things that you need to think about. So at this point, think about your alignment with the community needs. So this, like I said before, is like, what is your vision and what is the community's vision? What is the alignment between your community needs and your social issue? So strike a balance between the two and look at the vision that you have for the program you're creating for, and now look at the community's vision. are they, can they be merged? Is there an alignment? Is there a common goal between the two of them? So before you create your strategic plan, you look at that. You look at, what is the alignment? Am I going to cause more harm, or am I going to help this community? So make sure that when you heard from the community and you look at the research that you've done on yourself, you strike a balance between the two so that you don't cause harm. And another thing is, look at the action plan that the stakeholders gave you. So what did the action plan say? What was it in their action plan that is also in your strategic plan? So if their action plan and your strategic, what are the things that you can implement and incorporate to make sure that, they feel presented, they're heard, and they can own it? Because that's what you want when you go in a community, is you want a community that's going to own the product that you are sending, a community that's going to own it. So this is a community that, so you make sure they own it by incorporating what they said, by incorporating their ideas, by incorporating everything that they said. So you make sure that you reach a common goal. So you make sure that there is a balance between your social issue and their community needs. So they get what they need, but also your social issue gets to be addressed. Whatever you're passionate about gets to be addressed. And another thing, the last thing that you have to think about is sustainability and empowerment. So the relationship of the community empowerment and sustainability. Sustainability refers to the maintenance of a project through the community support to prolong the project benefits for the society. So the community participation is an active development process where the recipients not only receive the benefits, but they are actively part of the project. So this actually, it's proven that if a community owns an if a community owns or are empowered to own a project, that project is most likely to succeed. So when it comes to sustainability, it is more important to think about, would this community be affected if you no longer do the job that you're doing in that community? Would this community worry? So an example is, so if you are providing food to hungry babies in a community. And so you say, okay, we're going to give them formula, or we're going to give them water or porridge, whatever food that babies eat until they're like 2 years old, or maybe until they're a year old. Um, what happens when those babies get to 3 years old and you stop giving them that food that they're used to? What happens to these babies when you leave, when you can no longer serve? Another thing of sustainability is, let's say you're doing a one-time project where you have all these people coming in to address issues of abuse, to address, and I keep referring to this because these are things that I'm passionate about, but to address issues of abuse. If they come in that community to address those issues, then what is a follow-up plan? How do you make sure? Because if you are asking people to open up and share their stories, then how do they receive help by the wounds that are opened by this awareness campaign? So you're thinking about, how can you sustain it for the wellness of the community? The community comes first. So how do you sustain that? How is this sustainable? How will the community benefit from this even when we leave? And also you think of it in terms of, is this solution solely dependent on you or the community? So if the solution is solely dependent on you and not the community, then you have to look for ways to balance it so that the community also has a say in the solution. Not has a say, but the solution depends on the community as well. The involvement of the community is primal as your own involvement. So think about it in those things of how can we sustain this? How is the community going to be sustained even when we leave? Is this project going to be beneficial? Will they still benefit from this even after we're not here? Um, and the last thing is empowerment. What is your empowerment strategy? You have to have that in mind. How are you going to empower this community to be involved? I recently read somewhere that said, we shouldn't look at empowerment as saying, oh, this group of people do not have the power, so now we're giving them the power to do this. But we should look at the empowerment of say, like, oh, they already have the capability of doing this, so I'm just here to support it, so that when we leave, they can still own it. So you empower them. You look at your strategy and say, what are aspects of this project that the community needs to take? If your stakeholders are girls, how much of their voice is in the program that you have built? How much of their voice is represented? But also, how are they owning it? So you are empowering them to own it because you want your project to be successful. So it will be successful if you empower them to own it. Also, how will the community take ownership of the project? So you have said all those things, you have put in your strategy, your empowerment strategy. Make sure that the community you're serving takes ownership of it, because that's what is going to drive it. That's what also, like, a lot of community projects are successful if the community participates. They're successful if a community feels like they owned it, if the community, and mostly the community feels like that if a project is serving their needs, if they feel represented, if their words or their voice is represented. So that's how a lot of projects are successful, a lot of community projects. So when you have done all that research, you know when you have looked at the empowerment plan, when you have figured out how sustainable it is, when you have looked at the balance, like, okay, how do we balance this? What is the balance between my work, my passion, my social issue to what this community needs? And then you come in together, then you're ready to do a community, to serve your community in a way that it doesn't cause it harm, to serve your community in a way that it doesn't take their dignity away, but you remember that they are the key stakeholders and you are respectful of that. So yeah, that is what I wanted to share today about serving your communities, because I think a lot of us are passionate about serving marginalized communities, and also just like, what are the best practices, and how do we avoid causing harm? So yeah, thank you so much for listening to me, and yeah, letting me give you my 2 cents.
Thank you so much, Sunga.
Bye.
Bye.